اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ونريد أن نمن على الذين استضعفوا في الأرض ونريد أن نمن على الذين استضعفوا في الأرض ونجعلهم أئمة ونجعلهم ونريد أن نمن على الذين استضعفوا في الأرض ونجعلهم ونجعلهم الوارثين. ونريد أن نمن على الذين استضعفوا في الأرض ونجعلهم أئمة ونجعلهم الوارثين. ونمكن لهم في الأرض ويري فرعون وهامان وجنودهما ويري فرعون وهامان وجنودهما منهم ما كانوا يحذرون. وأوحينا فإذا خفت عليه فألقيه في اليم ولا تخافي ولا تحزني إنا رادوه إليك وجاعلوه من المرسلين فالتقطه آل فرعون ليكون لهم عدوا وحزنا إن فرعون وهامان وجنودهما كانوا خاطئين وقالت امرأة فرعون قرة عين لي ولك وقالت امرأة فرعون قرة عين لي ولك لا تقتلوه عسى أن ينفعنا أو نتخذه ولدا وهم لا يشعرون وأصبح فؤاد أم موسى إن كادت لتبدي بي لولا أن ربطنا على قلبها لتكون من المؤمنين. وقالت لأخته قصيه وقالت لأخته قصيه فبصرت به عن جنوب وهم لا يشعرون. وحرمنا عليه المراضع وقالت لأخته قصيه فبصرت به عن جنب وهم لا يشعرون. وحرمنا عليه المراضع وحرمنا عليه المراضي من قبل فقالت هل أدلكم على أهل بيت يكفلونه لكم وهم له ناصحون. فرددناه إلى أمه كي تقر عينها ولا تحزن ولتعلم أن وعد الله حق ولكن أكثرهم لا يعلمون. ولما بلغ أشده واستوى آتيناه حكما وعلما وكذلك نجزي المحسنين. وكذلك نجزي المحسنين صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على رسول الله وآله الأطهار على رسول الله وآله الأطهار اللهم صل على محمد وعلى
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. As always, Jazakallah khair, respected Qari Gul Ahmed. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you for all of the nights of this amazing and heart-wrenching recitation of the Quran. Tonight is Shab-e Ashura, one of the most tragic nights in the history of the Islamic calendar. Due to the fact that we began our programs one day afterwards, inshallah tonight we'll be covering the martyrdoms of both Ghazi Abbas Alamdar and his brother Abi Abdullah Hussain عليهم الصلاة والسلام, the two most tragic personalities of Karbala, the ones whose stories hurt the heart the very most. To begin, inshallah, I would like to invite Brother Muhammad Sadiq to deliver a short presentation for the night. Please welcome him with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Assalamu alaikum everybody. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala al-ashraf al-anbiya'i wal-mursaleen. Sayyidina wa nabiyyina wa habibi qulubina Abul Qasim Muhammad. Wa ala ahli baytihi tayyibin at-tahirin. I would like to begin with an interesting verse from Surah An-Nisa. It's 135. And it translates to something like this. O you who believe, be steadfast maintainers of justice, witnesses for God, though it may be against your own selves, or your parents, or your kinsfolk, whether they be rich or poor, for God is nearest to both. It's quite a beautiful verse, and it gets us to reflect upon justice. And I think tonight's a great opportunity, considering that we're commemorating Yawm Ashura, even though we may be a day later or a day before, it doesn't matter. But the fact of the matter is, it's a night where justice was manifested, and light and darkness were clearly separate on that day. Tonight we elegize the Ahlul Bayt and their companions. We elegize Abbas, the son of Imam Ali, Amir al-Mu'mineen, who emanated and replicated him both in character and form. Abbas was the backbone of Abi Abdullah al-Hussain, and when he was slain on that day, it sent a ricocheting effect across the world, undoubtedly. It caused an outlook of justice in the Muslim world, something I'll touch upon later, but perhaps in a different context. Peace be upon Abbas on the day he was born, the day he died, and the day he shall be brought back to life. May his memory shine brighter than the stars in the evening sky as a beacon of hope and justice. Today I sort of want to talk about justice, its importance, and a way that we could practically manifest and perhaps tackle the injustice of our time. Today I speak primarily to an Australian audience. for people specifically who are Muslims, and more specifically to a people who claim to uphold justice in the name of the Ahlul Bayt. Today, I would like to call out a tyrant, and that tyrant is the tyrant that's been around since the dawn of time and shall exist so long as Bani Adam breathes, and that is heartlessness. It's the very same tyrant that was responsible for the death of Imam Hussain and his companions, and it is the same tyrant that oppresses our elderly community. And today, I would like to talk about elder abuse. Bit of a segue, pardon me. So, elder abuse, what is it? Like, let's define it. I mean, it's a term. Is it a woke term? Is it a real term? What is it? I can assure you it's not a woke term, one of these isms or, you know, all these sort of abuses that come up all the time, but it's a practical and a real thing that exists in Australia. Elder abuse is a breach of the expectation of trust, causing some sort of harm to people of age, and can be emotional, financial, physical, sexual, and so on. It's something that we're not immune to as a community, and it's something that Australia, which is an aging population, is facing more and more of. And I believe that it is vital that the Muslim community have an input in how we deal with this issue. We have to be proactive as a community. The same way Imam al-Hussain in Karbala was proactive in his stance. He wasn't reactive to Yazid, but he took a proactive stance. And in the same way, we ought to take a proactive stance to any injustice of our time. And one such would be elder abuse. So, let's have a quick scan of the demographic of Australia. The elderly population make up about 16% of Australia. So that's defined with 65 years and over, right? So all up, that's about 4.2 million people. That's a pretty big number if you think about it. That constitutes some countries, right? So according to the last ABS report, there are 500,000 people aged over the age of 85. That's 2% of our population. By the 2050s, that will double in percentage, and that'll result in almost 2 million people over 85. That's a really old age if you think about it. Like, the life expectancy is about 85 to 87 in Australia right now. 2 million of those. Just put that in your minds for now. So this segment of the population is most frail and also most vulnerable in terms of health as well as emotional well-being, yada, yada, yada. We'll get into it. So in 2017, there was a call for a royal commission. A royal commission is like a governmental investigation into certain issues. So we heard about the royal commission into banking, we heard about institutional abuse, and out of the institutional abuse came this thing about elderly abuse. And it was quite interesting, the findings, because elder abuse seems to have taken place in two settings. The first one is in elderly institutions, such as aged care homes, hospitals, places like that. And the second place that it took place in were homes. And it's quite interesting that the findings show that the main perpetrators of elder abuse happen to be people who are closest to the vulnerable person, meaning family members, close friends, and whatnot. And I'll get to it furthermore, because we'll find that it's particularly people from our community who tend to be most vulnerable. Kelly Scott is a great journalist from the ABC, and she had a quantitative data set that showed that 14% over the age of 65 have experienced abuse of some sort. According to the Royal Commission into Elder Abuse, 39.2% of the elderly in aged care facilities have reported abuse. That's the reported cases. You could imagine that if elder abuse has taken place, it's a very personal matter. Not everyone's going to open up to it. Not to mention that elder abuse as a concept is relatively new. Like, it's not part of our formal vocabulary. So to even think about it as a concept and then report about it is something completely different. That's a secondary layer to it, right? Of that percentage, of the 39.2% of people who experience elder abuse, 30% was in the form of neglect. That could be emotional, it could be not giving people food, and we'll get into that. 22% was emotional abuse, which is particularly prevalent in migrant communities through the use of blackmail. If you don't do this, I won't let you see my children. If you don't do this, I won't let you do that. A lot of that emotional manipulation and abuse there. 5% was physical, and alhamdulillah, although little, but it is a substantial number, 1% was in an inappropriate form. The Royal Commission had no concrete data about this particular fact, but there seems to be quite a ruckus, quite a rowdy noise at the moment by lawyers with regards to financial abuse of elderly people, and we'll get to that again. So, let's see the different types of elder abuses, and let's look specifically in institutions. In institutions such as aged care homes, although not very popular in our community, we have to bear in mind there are people from our community and in the wider Australian community who are in aged care facilities, and they suffer the brunt of this, right? If they're not our brothers and sisters in faith, They're our brothers and sisters in humanity, and we have an obligation to uphold justice wherever it be. So, the first major form of abuse was restrictive practices. Restrictive practices would basically be this. You're all here tonight, right? If I locked all the doors in here and I kept you in here without your consent, that would be a restrictive practice. That's a civil wrong. It's called a tort. You can't necessarily face jail penalty for it, unless in extreme circumstances, but there's a hefty fine, and potentially it could go on a criminal record, depending on the situation. Now, in elderly institutions, how is this? So there's a clear overuse of inappropriate restrictive measures. The first one is pharmacological, which means people of age are essentially drugged out to the extent that they're immobile and can no longer move. And that has been as a result of understaffing and a few other things, that you'd rather drug a person than to keep them awake where they constantly complain. That's number one. Number two is physical, where they either isolate a person of age or they physically restrain them to their bed or to their couch or whatever. Now just picture, this could be our sisters, our mothers, our grandmothers, our great-grandmothers. It's a statistic on the paper, but we have to personalise this and empathise, because these are our people at the end of the day who suffer from this. The Royal Commission has called for an immediate cessation of restrictive practices. The data has shown for the past 20 years that this is not effective in getting successful outcomes in any form. Yet it has been continued and is still continued till today. In 2020 alone, there were 5,178 cases of assault in the form of restrictive practices. That's just 2020. That's 2 years ago. Now that's one. The second one is a lack of substantial care. The first one is a lack of hygiene. 70% of people over the age of 65 suffer from incontinence of some sort, which means they can't hold their bladder, right? Just as a child has a nappy, old people eventually will have a nappy too. And what's really interesting is that nappies are not changed for 3 days sometimes. 70% of people have experienced this over the age of 65. Crazy. The second one is dementia patients. They're amongst the worst treated. They lack regular meals. There are reports of people gone 3 days without meals. Further to that, there is a lack of nutritious meals. So for example, you might get a mash and a bit of gravy, just one serving, once in every 3 days. It's crazy. There are even reports, there's a Four Corners report, which I recommend everyone to have a look into, an ABC Four Corners report of 3 ladies. One of them was a World War II veteran. She was a nurse on the front, right? And you could imagine she served her country. She was a devout Christian lady. She gave everything she had to the community. And she was in an elderly home for 2 years. And she had lost almost 50 kilos. She was bare bones by the end of it. Bare bones. That was due to a neglect of food as well as nutritious food. The third aspect of it is a lack of oral hygiene. We lose our teeth when we get old. Yet, firstly, dental is not covered in Medicare. That's a political issue. I won't get into it. The Greens can talk about that all day long. But the second aspect of it is that these aged care facilities are promising dentures, but are not providing. Right? All right, the fourth major issue pertains particularly to migrant communities. That's pretty much everyone here tonight. Non-consensual appointment of a power of attorney. So people tend to lose, or the mental state deteriorates over time, right? And so we say, all right, yes, my grandmother, don't sign this contract, I'll sign it on your behalf. And when you make that legal, it's called a power of attorney. But unfortunately, a lot of people misuse this power, right? So there's a classic case of a Mario. There are Italian migrants. They came, they couldn't speak the language, they got a bit old, they got their son as their power of attorney, and what did he do? He put their house, their property, as a security for a bank loan to fund his business. Now they signed a piece of paper, whatever, or he signed on their behalf, and the guy squandered the money, used it on whatever he did. It wasn't even for business purposes. And when push came to shove, who was responsible? It was the 2 old couple. So legally, they are responsible. Equity is a different jurisdiction of the law. They had recourse in equity. But once again, we see that there is this financial abuse that takes place. And as I said, a vast majority of financial abuse is perpetrated by family members. The next one is emotional blackmail. We've spoken about that. Non-consensual guarantors. We've spoken about that. The other one is that the people who are most at risk of this is none other than the women of our community. So yes, you have elder abuse across the board, but the particular group, 55%, tend to be women of migrant backgrounds. That's a huge, staggering number. That's our mothers, that's our sisters, potentially our daughters in the future. Ultimately, what I'm trying to say here is if we can't take care of the trees that bore us the fruits, right? If we can't expect to take care of the trees, the fruits will be corrupted. And if the fruits are corrupted, who's to say that trees would grow in the future? It's a bit of a wild analogy. What I mean to say is we have to look back and take care of our past in order to nurture the future. So what's the policy response by the government? This is a great question. The first one is the government has slapped $15 million into research. The first thing is research to identify risk factors. The second one is to conduct more research. And the third one is to propose legislation to enshrine elderly rights. Interesting, we've had a royal commission which is research. I don't know what more you could do. Now this is something which is quite interesting. Psychologically in Australia, I think across the board, we have an expectation of the government as if they're our saviour. There's an issue and the government's going to intervene and somehow magically fix it. I don't know how attitudes of Australians overall will be fixed by $15 million. If you know someone's sentiment, someone's value system being changed by money, please do let me know, but I've never seen that. It requires something different, a turn of the heart. The irony is the Royal Commission, which proposed to enshrine the rights of the elderly, this is quite interesting. The first major factor that they identified was a short staffing in the industry, which is fair across the board. But the second thing, and the more poignant feature of it, and the Age and Community Service Australia also diagnosed this issue, was that fundamentally it was an ethical issue. The first ethical issue, they said, was the unwillingness to give autonomy to people of age. In other words, it's a hold on power, it's a power grab, right? The second ethical issue, which I think was absolutely mind-boggling, was they clearly said in their report it was a lack of beneficence. Beneficence is what we would call the rahmah in our tradition, right? And we know how central rahmah is. For God's sakes, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim is in 113 of the 114 verses of the Quran. We believe in rahmah. At the very core, Allah's name is ar-Rahman, right? So the question is, what is the Muslim response? I mean, this has been going on now for about 4 years. And we've had very minimal. There's been a lot of commentary on the sidelines from the Catholic community, the Anglican community, we've had the Hare Krishna community, but the Muslims seem to be not very focused on this at the moment. You do a quick YouTube search, Islam or Muslims, elder abuse. There are about 4 videos that come up. Get a VPN, try a different server. Still about 4 videos that come up. It's not a whole lot. But this is the thing, we have the agency to make this change. And there are many things that we could do. We could look to our own tradition and find examples how to remedy this issue. And we could also propose solutions from our tradition going forward, which can be modelled in Australia. And I'm going to talk about a few of them. The first one is in Surah Al-Isra, verse number 23. Oh, pardon me. Surah Al-Isra, yes, verse number 23. Be kind and helpful to your parents, should they reach old age, once again, whilst you are alive, either one or both, do not even say uff to them. According to Tabari, one of the Mufassir, he says that uff is in reference to hygiene. So remember we spoke about incontinence? His whole thing was that uff was about the smell of their, incontinence and whatnot. It's quite interesting, if you look into the ethics of it. Or raise your voice at them, but speak to them in an honourable manner. And we find that honour is at the core of it. Hurriya is one part. Hurriya is freedom, rights. Yes, that discourse is there in legislation. But ultimately, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ is the basis of insan. At the end of the day, although they are old, they are humans and they deserve honour. If we look at how to honour them, Imam Zain al-Abidin in Article 22 and 23 of Risalat al-Hukuk is beautiful. He says, the right of your mother is to know that she carried you where no one else carries you, and she gave you the fruit of life, of her heart, which no one ever gave to you, and she protected you with all herself. She did not care if she went hungry as long as you ate, thirsty as long as you drank, if she was naked as long as you were clothed, if she was in the sun as long as you were in the shade. She gave up sleep for your sake. She protected you from the heat and the cold in order that you might belong to her. How beautiful that at the very center of our tradition is a respect, not only for our parents, but the elderly more generally. The right of the father is that you should know that he is your root. Without him, you would not be. Whenever you see anything in yourself which pleases you, know that your father is the root of its blessing upon you. So praise God and thank him in that measure, and there is no strength except in Allah. Social reforms that we could propose as a Muslim community from within our own tradition. The first one is awqaf. So a lot of people say that it's due to the fact that we can't afford services. Although there are government subsidies available, awqaf, what are they? They're essentially what we would call in the English language a trust mechanism. They operate as a trust. It's a legal entity which no one owns but is for the benefit of the people, right? So if we look at Imam al-Jawad alayhi salam, Imam al-Jawad is quite amazing. He's not very spoken about, but his significance and his danger, particularly to the Abbasid Caliphate, was the establishment of awqaf throughout the empire. And what that did was essentially run a parallel social system to the Abbasid Caliphate at the time, meaning that people could access social services from the Ahlul Bayt without having to go through the government. I think that's a beautiful model. I mean, we're a long way off as a Muslim community in this country from having, a large representation in Parliament, although we have almost 3 or 4 members at the moment. But what's more pertinent is that we have the social mechanism to do so. Awqaf, yes, we can give money to our mosques, our schools, and this and that, but I believe a place that we should redirect our money and our funds, inshallah, if we can, if we have the foresight and the mechanism to do so, is in aged care services. The second one is the integration of elderly into daily activities. Public space is on the decline. There's plenty of literature to show that across the board, right? Yes, it's on the rise, but generally it's on the decline. One of the last bastions of public space is none other than houses of worship or events like this, right? The mosque is an integral place not only for the youth, but it should also be designed to cater for the most vulnerable of the elderly, 85 and over. And yes, it may be a slog for them to get there, but we have to facilitate where we can to integrate both young and old, to create a cohesive society. The third one is honor. And I feel as though time is a great way to honor someone. If you honor someone and truly value that person, you give them time. As a husband would to a wife and vice versa, it's ultimately time that you spend with each other, which is an element of respect, that shows your respect. Some little things that we can do, and particularly for the young people, check in on your grandparents. If you have a phone, that's a beautiful tool. Use it. Call your grandparents. Call that auntie that no one ever speaks to. Send out a WhatsApp message, a voice message, a good morning. Something so simple goes such a long way. It's at the center of being a good Muslim. Ma din, adin al-khuluq. What is religion? Religion is excellence of character. Finally, ensure where possible, and it's sometimes difficult to identify, but we have to identify when we are being manipulative and when others around us are being manipulative. It may not be as pertinent within our community. Who knows? I don't know. There's not a lot of research to show. But we have to be aware of the fact that old people are manipulated. I mean, how many of our grandparents have been scammed by, the Prince of Nigeria? That's just one example, right? Let alone people within our own family. And sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes it's even our own selves. But it comes back to the Quranic verse. Struggle in the course of justice, even if you must struggle against yourself, your kinsfolk, X, Y, and Z. The final thing is understand the lay of the land and the mechanisms that are available to us at hand to prevent these issues. In total, we have to be like Hussain and his family and his companions and stand up to tyranny. Tyranny of our time, tyranny for the time to come, and identify the tyranny of the past and use all the tools that we have available not only to protect ourselves, but to protect the ones that we love and strive for justice. I believe that if Imam al-Hussain was here today, that he wouldn't be silent on this issue. Ali al-Akbar could easily have been silent. I mean, he's a kinsman of Yazid. His mother is from Bani Umayyah. Abbas was related to Shimr. He could have easily have said, look, mate, I'm not going to take sides here, take sides there, I'll just step back. But no, rather, Ihsan, the excellence of his character was that he joined the affray with Imam al-Hussain and stood for justice. He stood for something. As Muslims, we cannot go to bed not thinking of another Muslim or another human being. It is integral that we take part in the struggle for justice. Sorry to bore you. I'll leave it to the Sheikh now. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Muhammad. Very insightful speech, a bit long, but that's all right. Alhamdulillah. It's really a throwback to a lot of the things that Sheikh Hamid has been discussing over the past night, the practical realities of the injustices which exist in our society as well. Even though we're generally considered a developed society, it's good to shed light on these realities. When it comes to right-wing economics and that kind of stuff, you see society moving in this kind of direction, taking shortcuts where it's necessary and not considering that people like that aren't just numbers, they're human beings, as you mentioned. And it reminds me of the example of Imam Ali when he found the blind man helpless, no one there to defend him, no one there to protect him, out on the street, out in the cold. And he told these people, how dare you, he's been working all his life. You're just leaving him like this? And he gave him money from the Baytul Mal, the public treasury. If we go back to the examples of our Imams again, we find that this is the path that we should be following. And insha'Allah ta'ala, through shedding light on these issues and getting involved, just as you do with the humanities helpers, insha'Allah we can raise awareness and tackle a lot of these issues as much as we can. Jazakallah khair, as always a pleasure to have you, and we'll proceed now with the main lecture from His Eminence Sheikh Hamid Waqar. Please welcome him with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبو القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Alhamdulillah, as always, Hajj Qul Ahmed, amazing Quran, and thank you Brother Muhammad Sadiq, amazing talk. Elder abuse, interesting. I was looking at different aspects of the world in general that people are falling behind in, and definitely the elderly is one of them that unfortunately I didn't have time to talk about, but you did, which is good. Inshallah, I wanted to continue our talk where we're looking at trying to rekindle our pledge of allegiance to our present Imam al-Zaman alayhi salam through the remembrance of the tragedies of the Ahlul Bayt. And one thing we've been doing, so each lecture we've been doing two things. One, looking at someone who's fallen to try to learn from them. And another one, trying to enrich our understanding of the religion by looking at these global issues that are prominent in the society today. Right? So for the first part, we're going to look at someone that played a part in Karbala, that was in the army of Yazid. Right? And this person obviously didn't start out bad. We're talking about the fall of the elite. So he started out good, but that's where he ended up. Right? Before we talked about people who participated on the wrong side in the Battle of Jema, and then who abstained from participating. Talked about people in the Battle of Siffin, gave Quranic examples, and now Karbala for tonight. Okay? So this person, his name is Shurey ibn Harith al-Kindi, known as Ghazi Shurey. Don't know have you guys heard of him before? No? Yeah? Maybe. Maybe you've heard of one of the stories that he's involved in. Right? I'm sure you have actually. So this is a person who migrated to Medina from Yemen. Right? When he migrated, there's a dispute. It was right around the time where the Prophet passed away. So if it was just before and he saw the Prophet and is a companion, or was it just after and he didn't have a time to meet the Prophet when he was alive? But right around that time, he migrates to Medina. And slowly he gains prominence in the society. He becomes influential. He's very knowledgeable. He's has very strong logic. And in the time of the second Khalifa, Omar, he becomes a judge. Right? So he's appointed as a judge. He remains in this position all the way through to the time of Imam Ali alayhi salam. And Imam Ali alayhi salam also accepted him as a judge in his government. Not only that, Imam Ali alayhi salam actually went to him to pass judgment on a crime that took place, right, against Imam Ali alayhi salam. And this is a story you might know. So there's one time when a Christian stole the saddle or a shield. There's dispute, but let's use the saddle of the horse. Stole the saddle of the horse of Imam Ali alayhi salam. And Imam Ali a few days later or some time later sees this Christian with his saddle and says, "That's my saddle. Why you have my saddle? Give it back." And the Christian man said, "No, it's mine. Right? This is my saddle. What are you talking about?" And then the Imam took him to court. Right? This is the Khalifa of the Muslimin. This is a time when Imam Ali alayhi salam is the fourth Khalifa. Obviously, should have been the first, but he's right now the political leader of the Muslim Ummah, in addition to being the divinely appointed guide. And at this point, he takes this Christian man to court. So they go in front of Ghazi Shureh. So Imam Ali alayhi salam chose him in this instance. That's an honor. The Imam trusted his judgment here. Right? This shows that this person is someone who the Imam respects. Right? They go in front of him, and Imam Ali pleads his case. The Christian man pleads his case. Right? The judge, Qadi Shureh, he says, "Look, the saddle is in the possession of the Christian man," and he asked Imam Ali alayhi salam if he had any evidence to show that it's his, and the Imam didn't. All he had was his word, but there was no receipt, right? There was no physical evidence that he could provide to say that this saddle is mine. So the judge, Qazi Shureh, judged in the favor of the Christian and said, it's in the Christian's possession. There's no proof to say otherwise. Therefore, the ruling is it remains in his possession and his ownership. The Imam was okay with this ruling. He knew that it was his saddle. The Christian knew that it was his saddle. But the judgment was a judgment. The Imam walked away. The Christian man actually says, "Wow, look at this. This is the leader of the Muslim world right now. He knows I'm lying." And he accepts the judgment and walks away. This Christian man becomes Muslim right there. Right? He accepts Islam. We fast forward a little bit. Right? In the time of Muawiyah, right? So this is after Imam Ali alayhi salam is martyred. This is after Imam Hassan alayhi salam is martyred. Imam Hussain is alive, but Muawiyah is a Khalifa right now. Muawiyah passes away. Yazid comes into power. Right? What do the people of Kufa do? They gather in a person by the name of Suleiman's house, and they start to write letters to Imam Hussain alayhi salam to come. They see an opportunity here. Right? Muawiyah had a stronghold. There was also a peace treaty that kind of prevented the Muslims from standing up as well. But this peace treaty was broken when Yazid took power. So now was the time to rise up against him. People of Kufa recognized this, started sending letters. One of the people who sent a letter was Shureh ibn Harith. Qazi Shureh sent a letter to Imam Hussain, "Come, we'll support you." Right? Now, Imam Hussain receives these letters. What happens in the second night? Brother Hussain was mentioning this. The Imam sends Muslim ibn Aqil to check out the situation. Right? Muslim ibn Aqil goes to Kufa, sees that the people are behind him, sends a letter to Imam, "Come, they're with you." And then Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad comes and the whole situation changes. Right? One of the things Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad did was he attacked Hani, one of the supporters of Muslim. He beat him up physically, put him in prison. Right? We know the story. Hani was a person that had a very strong tribe that supported him a lot. So Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad picked the wrong person. Shouldn't have went after Hani. That was a big mistake of his. He got lucky, actually. Because Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad didn't have an army with him at this point. He just had a small group of people that were with him. Right? He had psychological power over the people, but he didn't have physical power. So he basically, attacks Hani, puts him in jail. Hani's tribe comes and they're protesting outside of the jail, basically. Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad recognizes he's in danger here. He doesn't have the power. He doesn't have the people to overpower this protest. So he needs to seek help. Who does he go to? Ghazi Shureh. Right? And he tells him, look, all I need you to do is tell the people he's alive. You're not lying. He's alive. He's in prison. He's alive. Just tell the protesters, Hani is alive in the jail right now. He's fine. There will be no more physical harm done to him. And we don't have an extensive hadith about what Shureh said. We just know he went and said he's alive. That's pretty much all we have. So he said he's alive. That dispersed the crowd. They became happy that at least he's not in danger, and they dispersed. Now, this was big, right? Sayyid Khamenei, he describes this event. He says this was one of the moments that could have changed history forever. Remember these moments that we talked about? That moment when Imam Ali alayhi salam's soldier was in the tent of Muawiyah in the Battle of Siffin? That moment that could have changed history forever? This is also one of those. He says if Ghazi Shureh didn't go and quell this protest might have overpowered Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad and even led to his death. Freed Hani, Muslim wouldn't have been executed. Who knows what would have happened? Right? It was this moment that this person was put to a test. And remember, these moments, all of us are put in these places, in these moments, where we have to make a decision. Do we stand for God? Or do we support the other side? And Ghazi Shureh made a mistake. And that mistake was costly. And then, after that, he ends up joining the army of Yazid. It wasn't easy for people not to join that army. Right? At that time, if you don't join the army, you're killed, your family's killed. Like, a lot of people were forced to go. Right? A lot of people made the decision to join the army even though they didn't support the cause. Right? But he had another choice. He could have joined with Imam Hussain. No, he went. I'm not going to discuss his intentions there. I have no idea. But he joined Yazid's army. He was on the wrong side of history. Imam Hussain on the plains of Karbala addressed the people who wrote letters. He was one of them. Shureh ibn Harith, didn't you send me a letter? What are you doing? What could he say? How do you respond to that? Right? Now remember, we're not pointing fingers. We're not saying this is a bad person. Let's go and let's attack him. Our point is to look within ourselves. Right? You never know how long you're going to live for. We don't know if we're going to be here next Muharram. We don't know if we're going to be alive next month of Ramadan. Right? We have an opportunity right now. We can renew this pledge, or we could keep pushing it off. We could really change our lives, or we could keep pushing it off. Right? Each moment that we think about this could be that moment. Right? You never know. Right now could be our moment. For me, I'm telling you guys, but I'm telling me first. You guys are hearing it. Who knows if you're going to get another chance? Last thing I'll say before I go to the next subject. When I was reading over this story, I was reminded of a story in my own life, right? I know a person that I went to high school with. His name was Ernest, right? This Ernest was a very interesting person, and we were pretty close in high school. And unfortunately, he joined one of the gangs of Los Angeles and became a very bad person. Did many, many bad things, right? And as our lives separated, and I went to Qom and then came back and would visit Los Angeles from time to time, one of the times I was visiting, he actually came over to my house. And he met with me. And actually, you know what? I might be wrong. This might be before I went to Qom, but regardless, I had changed my life. And he came to my house and he said, you know what? You became Muslim. You changed your life. I'm thinking about doing the same thing. And we had a good talk. We went out to lunch. We came back, sat down for a few hours, and he pretty much made the decision he wanted to become Muslim. He said, you know what? I'm going to come back, and on Friday, we'll go to the mosque. Right? So this was, I forget which day, but Tuesday, Wednesday, something. It was close to Friday. Just a couple days away. And then before Friday, I get the news. He went to one of the shopping centers, saw a rival gang member. They both pulled out guns, started shooting each other. Cops came. Ernest died. Didn't make Friday. Right? Made the decision to change his life. Didn't have the opportunity. Right? You never know. He was 21 years old or 20 years old, something like that. You never know. Right? These are opportunities that we have to change our life. Now, one of the things that we need to do to be able to make a long-standing change, and not just an emotional change, is better understand our religion. And we've been talking about many of the issues that this world is facing and trying to show a little kind of glimpse of how the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam approached them. We talked about poverty at the beginning, and our takeaway was to find a trustworthy, reputable charity organization, decide a very small portion of your income, secretly in your own house, just do little bank transfers every now and then, and support that cause. Right? We talked about refugee rights. Our takeaway was to maintain our Islamic identity even when we're minorities. Third one was pandemics and COVID. And our takeaway was to remember that we're being tested. Right? And we're being tested with sickness and with health. Fourth one was mental health. And our takeaway was the need to speak up when we need help and not sweep everything under the carpet, but be able to break the stigma of seeking professional health. Next, we talked about disability rights, and our takeaway was taqwa. The only thing that differentiates one another is taqwa. Then we talked about gender equality. Our takeaway was Islam comes before culture. Culture is great, but if our cultural practices are outside of the framework of Islam, we reject those. Right? And these might seem abstract, the connection, but if you hear from the speech, they make sense. And the next one was children's rights and how children are being abused and taken advantage of, the opposite to the elderly, I guess, but both vulnerable. And our discussion, our takeaway was to create a tranquil environment in our homes. Yesterday we talked about disinformation, and our takeaway was to be politically aware and obtain information from correct sources. Right? And now today we're talking about injustice and corruption. So it's a perfect segue into this talk, which was the one before, and we didn't talk beforehand, by the way. But when you mentioned injustice, I showed Jahangir, look, this is what I'm talking about. So it's perfect. Now, One of the things with corruption and injustice is it actually creates a barrier to all of the things that we've been talking about before. So we want to eradicate the world of poverty. Corruption and injustice stops that. We want to fight for gender equality. We want to fight for children's rights or elderly rights or whatever rights we're trying to fight for. Corruption and injustice create barriers, right? The World Bank says this. It says corruption is a barrier to ending extreme poverty and boosting the shared prosperity of the poorest populations. When it comes to addressing poverty, climate control, health care, gender equality, and many other issues, corruption gets in the way. So corruption not only in itself is negative, but it has long-lasting negative consequences on the society, right? We know there's many places in this world where people are being oppressed, right? So we have people in Afghanistan, people in Pakistan, people in Palestine, people in Africa, people in Latin America, people in Australia. If you look at the indigenous and the different statistics between indigenous and non-indigenous people. In America, you have people who are being oppressed. Not only countries, but populations within countries are being oppressed. As the brother mentioned, the elderly is a population within the society who are facing, many negative aspects of the society, unfortunately, as the brother mentioned. Right? So we have all of these things. We know as Muslims we need to stand up to injustice. Right? I just wanted to go, I'm going to go over a little bit. The brother mentioned a beautiful verse of Quran. I'll mention a hadith. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam says, Lam yab'ath Allah nabi'an qat illa bil bir wal adl. So Allah does not raise a prophet at all. So all of the prophets, by opposite, right, were raised with righteousness and justice. So the responsibility to establish righteousness, spirituality, and justice. To fight injustice. Every single prophet. So we can't say prophets were just spiritual and all they cared about is the relationship with God on an individual worship level. Every single prophet had the responsibility to establish justice, which means to fight injustice. Right? Obviously there are role models. The imams are the same. Every single imam, that one of their responsibilities was to establish justice. Not all of them had the opportunity. Some of them, like the brother mentioned, did it through the Awqaf system. Some of them, like Imam Hussain, fought. Imam Sajjad, Imam Sadiq taught, even in very different ways. One taught through du'as, one taught through classes. But every one of them had a responsibility to try to eradicate justice. They might not have had the opportunity, but they did what they could. Right? And we need to do the same. Now, justice, obviously, if we look at it in the word adl or idala in Arabic, it has two different forms. One of them is, putting everything in its right place, right? And that's more kind of universal. And the other one is when the justice we're talking about, right? But there's even hadith, for instance, one from Rasulullah, who he says, bil adl qamatus samawati wal ard. So the world and the heavens, basically the entire universe, is established or remains upright through justice. Right? And this justice could be universal justice, the planets and everything going how they should, the earth spinning how it should, all of that is an aspect of justice, but also social justice. And this phrase, bil adl, at the beginning of the sentence, is a form of emphasis. So when you look at balagha or eloquence in the Arabic language, when a word is taken out of its normal place and put somewhere else, it brings attention to that. right? So there's plenty of examples we have in the Quran. Iyaka na'budu, right? In Surah Fatiha, Iyaka put at the beginning is abnormal, right? We could say na'buduka, right? We worship you. But putting Iyaka first, big emphasis there, right? In English is the same thing. There's a book of eloquence, and I'll take this example from that. I forgot what the book was called, but anyways, it says the sailor is home, is one sentence. The sailor is home. Great. What if you say home is the sailor? There's more emphasis there, right? Just by putting the word out of place, right? In Arabic's the same. So with Arabic, with this sentence, emphasizing justice. Okay? Now, let's look at Imam Hussain alayhi salam and justice. Right? We know Imam Hussain alayhi salam sacrificed a lot. We're of the opinion that Imam Hussain alayhi salam knew what was going to happen before it happened. So he didn't leave Medina for Mecca and Mecca towards Kufa not knowing what's going to happen. He knew he was going to be martyred. He knew the male members of his family and his companions would be martyred. He knew the tragedies that would befall the children and the women after him. He still made that move because establishing justice was that important. Right? He mentions this himself. Not the part about bringing family, but he mentions justice. There's a letter that he wrote before he headed off towards Kufa, in the direction of Kufa, and obviously was stopped in Karbala. But this letter, it says this: there is no doubt that Rasulullah, the messenger of God, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, said in his lifetime, whoever sees an oppressive ruler, then he defines the oppressive ruler, who permits the divine prohibitions and breaks divine pledges, who opposes the sunnah of Rasulullah, of the messenger of God, and performs sins in front of the people. Right? Whoever sees this and does not react, Allah will raise that person with that oppressor. And that's big. Right? That means if we see a person in a position of prominence, whether it be political or otherwise, and we see that this person is corrupt, this person is permitting things that are against God, this person breaks divine pledges, this person opposes the sunnah, the lifestyle of the Prophet, the person sins openly without a care in the world, right? And if we do nothing, obviously we might not have the power to do anything, but if we just sit silent and not say anything, then on the day of judgment, we might be raised with that person. We'll be part of that person's camp, right? And that's definitely, probably, hopefully, not what we want, right? So we must stand up. We must at least express our dislike of the situation, if that's a minimum we could do, right? Now, obviously this letter was addressed to the people of Kufa, right, from Imam Hussain alayhi salam. But when the Imam speaks, his words echo. It's not just meant for a single person or a single tribe or a single group of people in history. It's meant for everybody. Until the day of judgment, we should be reading his words and learning from him. One of the things he did is stand up to oppression. Now, oppression in that time was huge. And we've gone over a lot of it already. Right? So we went over the whole story of Bani Umayyah and how during the time of the third Khalifa Uthman, the Bayt al-Mal, the treasury was changed. preference was given to members of Bani Umayyah and not, people of virtue or people equally. Right? They started to, give precedence to people unjustly. Right? There's a saying of the Prophet, La fadlu li-arabi ala ajami. There's no virtue of an Arab over a non-Arab. Wala li-ajami ala Arab. And not for a non-Arab over an Arab. Wala li-aswad ala ahmar. And not for a person with black skin over a person with red skin. Wala li-ahmar ala aswad. And not the opposite. Illa, except, what's the only criterion of value? We talked about it before. Taqwa. Illa bi taqwa. Right? Except through God consciousness, piety, however you want to translate that. Except through taqwa. But Bani Umayyah dismissed that and instituted their own system of virtue. And that was, if you're a member of Bani Umayyah, you're virtuous. If you're not, too bad. Right? After Uthman, and we know what happened with Uthman, there was the whole uprising due to this. And Uthman was eventually assassinated. Right? And one of the main reasons is the way he distributed Bayt al-Mal, the Islamic treasury. This was one of the main complaints. Right? Then Imam Ali alayhi salam took over. But then Muawiyah, unfortunately, and we went over the story of Abu Musa Ash'ari and Umar and Al-As. Right? We went over that story. Right? That's when Muawiyah came into power. When Muawiyah came into power, it became much worse. So not only did he divide the Bayt al-Mal unjustly, he used Bayt al-Mal to attack Imam Ali alayhi salam. He used it to attack him, to assassinate his character. Right? He would pay people to give the Juma khutbahs, and in their khutbah to curse Imam Ali alayhi salam, to do lan on Imam Ali. Right? It got to the extent in Sham that not only every Friday prayer would people curse the Imam. You know how we do the tasbih of Sayyidah Zahra? They would do tasbih of lan of Amir al-Mu'mineen. That's crazy. Right? I mentioned this story. There's a historical tradition that we have that a person left the masjid and forgot to curse Imam Ali alayhi salam and remembered on his way home, curses the Imam and builds a masjid on the land that he remembered to curse the Imam, as if that's a holy place because it reminded him to curse Imam Ali. Right? Think about the propaganda against the Ahlul Bayt here. Right? When Imam Ali alayhi salam was martyred, where was he martyred? Masjid Kufa. What was he doing? Praying. People in Sham were confused. Imam Ali prayed? What? Like they didn't understand how it is he could be killed in prayer because they didn't even think he prayed. Right? This is a person who we have a hadith that show that Imams after him struggled to maintain the level of worship that Imam Ali alayhi salam had. And people in Sham say he didn't even pray. They couldn't even understand that. Right? This is not their fault. This is Muawiyah's fault. And money from the Islamic treasury is being spent to destroy Islam. Right? What's more corrupt and unjust than that? And then Yazid comes into power and becomes even worse than that. So we know Yazid, obviously, right when he came to power, he tried to force Imam Hussain alayhi salam to pledge allegiance to him, and we know the story from that. Right? But after Ashura, what does Yazid do? We know what he does to the family of the Ahlul Bayt. After that, right, he attacked Medina. He had his soldiers rape the women of Medina. Tens of thousands of women were raped. Right? He then attacks people who were seeking refuge in the Kaaba, and he destroys the Kaaba. He catapults the Kaaba and levels it. Right? And he was assassinated a few years after that during this siege. But this is a person that all he did, from the moment that he took power, he spent money from the Islamic treasury for all these wars and all these battles to destroy the representatives of God on earth and the house of God on earth and the city of Rasulullah. All he did was spend money in this way. I can't understand worse oppression than that, but I'm sure I could be shocked. But think about that, right? How bad is this? Imam Hussain alayhi salam realized, if I sit down and allow this person to keep power and not say anything, I'll be just like the negative side of that hadith of Rasulullah, where I'm allowing this person to unjustly rule over the Muslim world, and I'm going to sit down and do nothing. So he took the opposite approach. I need to stand up. And he knew that he's going to have to sacrifice his life for that. Now, what do we take away from this? Right? There's injustice in our society. In this society, in Australia, there's classes of people who are being mistreated. Right? Identify them. Do something about it. You can do something. Right? Whether it's elderly, whether it's the children, whether it's the indigenous, whatever the case is, whether it's certain groups and classes of refugees, whoever is being mistreated, there's things we could do. Learn about it. Bring awareness to it. Right? See if there's any charity organizations you could give to help. See if there's volunteer roles that you could do to help. Right? Stand up, fight oppression in Australia or abroad. Right? When it comes to being abroad, obviously we don't have any responsibility to go anywhere and do anything, but we could bring awareness. We could say, look at what's happening in Palestine. Look at what's happening in Kashmir. Right? We're sitting nice and comfortable talking about Imam Hussain, not a worry in the world. There's places on this earth that are getting attacked. There was a whole thing in Kashmir recently. There was a whole thing in Afghanistan recently where people in the masjid are being attacked for remembering the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. We could bring awareness. We could, again, find reputable, trustworthy charity sources to help. There's things we could do, even if we don't have to go over there and do anything. There's things we could do from here that, can help the situation a little bit. But the number one thing is being aware. Right? Always be aware of the plight of the Muslims and the mu'mineen around the world. Right? As the brother said, there's a tradition from the Prophet that if someone, I'm trying to remember I'm not going to quote it exactly just in case I mess it up, but the gist of it is we shouldn't go to sleep without thinking of our Muslims around the world. Or we shouldn't wake up without contemplating about the plight of the Muslims around the world. Something we should do. That's our takeaway, is that we should be aware of the injustices that are happening around us to Muslims and non-Muslims. And through that awareness, inshallah, it should motivate us to do something. Now, Brother Hussain will come and he'll describe the tragedies that befell Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam and Abi Abdullah al-Hussain alayhi salam. And these are two examples of people who stood up to the tyranny of their time, who sacrificed everything to try to protect Islam and try to protect the Muslim world and humanity in general. Right? we're remembering them not as abstract human beings who were tragically murdered. Because if we do that, I feel the value of Muharram diminishes. If all we're doing is that. But if we bring the tragedy into our daily life and realize, how does this tragedy, how can I use this to change myself? That's when Muharram stays alive. And that's what allows the sacrifice of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam to help the community to continue to grow all the way through to the Day of Judgment, inshallah. Please welcome Brother Hussain with 3 loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ولا تحسبن الذين قتلوا في سبيل الله أمواتا بل أحياء عند ربهم يرزقون. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First of all, as always, Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Hamid, for this night and all of the others, raising awareness in the realities of what are taking place today, all of the injustices, the corruption, the injustice, how it prevents steps being taken in order to resolve the plights of those who are oppressed, those who are needy. It brings to mind war and the war machine, the military-industrial complex, which essentially thrives from the blood of innocent human beings. It brings to mind cash crops in places like Africa and South America, where crops are deliberately designed to harvest not food items, but commodities that are imported to the West, coffee beans and things like that, instead of food items that could feed the population. You have these issues taking place, and inshallah, as we learn more about them and the system that allows such injustices to exist, we can work towards addressing them. And that is, of course, one of the ways we honor Imam al-Husain's broader message. Tonight, of course, Shab Ashur, as we mentioned, it will be the night of Abul Fadl al-Abbas alayhi salam, as well as our beloved Abi Abdullah al-Hussain, as-Sayyid al-Shuhada, the master of martyrs. Abbas alayhi salam was born on the 26th year of the Hijri calendar, on the 4th of Sha'ban. The word Abbas itself, it means the one who frowns, because he would frown upon the face of evil. When Shimr came to him, as Sheikh Hamid was mentioning, he came to him offering him safety in return for abandoning Abi Abdullah al-Hussain in no uncertain terms. Abbas alayhi salam tells Shimr to go straight to hell, offering him this kind of immunity, but leaving Imam al-Hussain helpless and alone. He would never do that to his Imam. This was his piercing glare upon the face of evil. As a young baby, Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam used to rock Abbas up and down on his knee, placing him on his knee lovingly, the way a father does. He would rock him up and down, and he would kiss those little hands of Abi Fadl al-Abbas, the same hands that would be cut during the battle in the service of Abi Abdullah al-Hussain. On the day of Ashura, after the martyrdom of Aun and Muhammad عليهم السلام, after Qasim ibn al-Hassan is trampled to pieces by the enemy horses, after Ali al-Akbar is impaled through the chest with a spear, the only two warriors that remain behind are Abi Abdullah al-Hussain and his beloved Abi Fadl al-Abbas عليهم الصلاة والسلام. Yet Imam al-Hussain does not give him permission to fight because he is the backbone of his army, and he tells him he needs someone like him to protect the women and the children from these mal'oon, from these cursed soldiers. Therefore he does not let him fight. But then Abbas hears the cries of the young Sukaina, Al-Atash, Al-Atash. The thirst is killing me, Sukaina screams, and Abbas's heart breaks. He turns to his brother Abi Abdullah. He asks Imam al-Hussain once again for permission to fight. Imam al-Hussain does not give his permission, but he does allow him to go fetch some water to quench the thirst of the children, to quench the thirst of Sukaina salamullahu alayha. Abbas alayhi salatu wasalam mounts his horse, and Abbas charges towards the enemy forces like a hurricane. It's said that 4,000 soldiers were guarding the Furat at this point in time, but when they saw the approach of Abbas, all 4,000 of them dispersed, terrified of their incoming doom. Abbas alayhi salatu wasalam cut through their ranks, hacking through them one by one until he reached the Furat with ease. Abbas dismounts his horse. He kneels down in front of the Furat and he gathers up the water within his palms. As he gathers up the water, he holds it in place, looking at it. At this point in time, the thirst is hurting Abbas so much, the history says that it felt like his heart was on fire. The thirst and the heat of Karbala was killing Abul Fadl al-Abbas, but he did not drink because he remembered the thirst of Sukaina and Abi Abdullah al-Hussain, his brother. Abbas alayhi salam drops the water back inside the river. He pulls out his water satchel and he fills it with water from the Furat, and this is where we get one of his great titles, Abu Qirba, the father of the water satchel. He did not drink the water himself. Instead, he filled that satchel for the sake of Sukaina and Abi Abdullah al-Hussain. Abbas mounts his horse once again, intent to return to the camp, and at this point Umar ibn Sa'ad la'natullah alayhi is terrified. He is terrified because he knows that if Abul Fadl al-Abbas reaches the camp and he drinks the water, he knows that if Imam al-Hussain drinks the water, then these two alone, revitalized and reinvigorated, are enough to vanquish their entire army. And so Umar ibn Sa'ad orders the soldiers to surround Abi Fadl al-Abbas. Abbas is surrounded, yet they do not come close to him, because any time he sees an enemy coming towards him, he is cut down so quickly. Yet there are two mal'oon that are hiding behind palm trees, and Abbas cannot see them coming. The first one, he comes at Abbas from behind and he cuts off the right hand of Abul Fadl al-Abbas. Abbas says, if you cut off my right hand, then I will not stop serving the religion and my Imam. And he continues to move forward and forward. Then the second mal'oon comes from behind the tree and he cuts off the left hand of Abul Fadl al-Abbas. The same hands that were kissed by Imam Ali are now on the plains of Karbala, burning upon the hot sands. Abul Fadl al-Abbas, at this point, he is determined to continue his journey until he reaches his destination. He is holding the water satchel between his teeth, marching forward, but the enemy begins showering him with arrows and arrows. One of the arrows pierces through the water satchel. And at this point, Abbas is heartbroken because he cannot quench the thirst of his beloved Sukaina. He cannot quench the thirst of his beloved brother Abi Abdullah al-Hussain. Abbas is helpless. The arrows continue to fly. They continue to fly. An arrow pierces through the right eye of Abul Fadl al-Abbas. The arrow pierces through his right eye, another arrow pierces through his chest. And a man comes upon Abul Fadl al-Abbas from behind and he hits an iron pillar against the back of his head. Abbas falls from his horse, and when he falls he lands on his face with the arrow still lodged through his eye, and it pierces the back of the skull of Abul Fadl al-Abbas. Imam Hussain rushes towards the scene. Imam al-Hussain rushes towards the scene and he gathers Abbas within his arms. Abbas cries as he looks upon his brother. He tells Abi Abdullah al-Hussain that he does not wish to return to the camp because he cannot bear to look upon Sukaina's face. He cannot bear to look Sukaina in the eye, knowing that he could not bring water to quench her thirst. Imam al-Hussain looks upon Abbas and he makes him promise that he would say his name for the last time as he takes his final breath, because Abbas would always call Abi Abdullah al-Hussain Mawla. He would always call him master, but he would never call him brother. And at this final point in time, before he takes his last breath, Abi Fadl al-Abbas says the name of Hussain and he calls him Akhi. Abul Fadl al-Abbas' soul departs and it goes towards the heavens. Imam al-Hussain is heartbroken as he cries out, my back is broken. Abbas was the backbone of his army and now he is broken. Imam al-Hussain returns towards the camp and the women begin to wail, Wa Abbasa, Wa Abbasa, Wa Abbasa. Imam al-Hussain is now truly alone and he cries out, هل من ناصر ينصرنا? Is there anyone there to help us? The only one who remains behind at this time is Ali al-Asghar, the 6-month-old. And soon he too is martyred in the way of Allah. And finally, Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam says his farewells to the women and children of the camp. But as he is departing, Sayyida Zainab salamullahu alayha approaches him. She approaches him and she tells him, wait, O son of Zahra, wait. Wait, O son of Zahra, wait. Imam al-Hussain, when he hears the name of his mother, he instantly turns around and goes to Zainab. Zainab tells him that their mother Fatima al-Zahra made her promise that on this day of tragedy, on this day of sorrow and grief, she would kiss Abi Abdullah al-Hussain on his forehead and his throat. And so Zainab kisses him in these two places, knowing that they would be grievously wounded in the battle to come. Imam al-Hussain charges towards the enemy like a storm. The history says that at this point all 30,000 of the enemy forces began to disperse at the charge of Abi Abdullah al-Hussain alayhi salam. So ferocious was he. This was the lion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the son of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib, the brother of Abbas and al-Hassan. He was charging towards the enemy forces, and Sheikh Abbas Qummi writes in Nafas al-Mahmum that Imam al-Hussain was able to strike down nearly 2,000 of the enemy forces, and realizing that they could not face him man to man, realizing that he was dying from thirst, they avoided him and they began to shower him with arrows, and they began to pelt him with stones one after another. Imam al-Hussain continued to fight, but a man can only take so much. One of the stones hit the forehead of Abi Abdullah al-Hussain. Blood smeared all over his face and it blinded him. Imam al-Hussain was blinded from the blood. An arrow pierced his throat. This was the same throat and the forehead that was kissed moment earlier by Sayyida Zainab, his sister. Imam al-Hussain fell from his horse. But none of the soldiers would come close to him. No one would dare to take the life of the grandson of Rasulullah. No one except for Shimr la'anatullah alayh. Shimr came towards Abi Abdullah al-Hussain. He kicked him in the leg and sat upon his blessed chest. Shimr pulled out a dagger and he began to stab Imam al-Hussain 14 times on the throat. Shimr stood up from Imam al-Hussain's body. He pulled out his sword and he cut the head of Abi Abdullah al-Hussain. Imam al-Hussain had finally departed from this world, but the tragedies did not stop. The soldiers of Yazid continued to plunder his body one after another. They took his helmet, his turban, his armor. They took everything that they could from the body of Abi Abdullah al-Hussain. One of the soldiers tried to take the ring from his finger, but when he could not take the ring, he cut off the finger of Abi Abdullah al-Hussain. Allah la'natullahi ala al-qawm al-zalimin. Ya Hussain, Ya Hussain, Ya Hussain. Everyone rise. Ya Hussain, Ya Hussain, Ya Hussain.
Ya Hussain, Ya Hussain, Ya Hussain. आशूर का सूरज है क़यामत की घड़ी है, भाई का गला कटता बहन देख रही है, मकतल में किसी माँ की सदा गूंज रही है। आए मेरे हुसैन मेरी गोद में आजा, आजा मेरे बच्चे मेरी आगोश में आजा, آجا میرے بچے میری آغوش میں آجا میرے لیے اے لال تو اصغر کی طرح ہے گودی میں میری گہوار ہے بستر کی طرح ہے اس دھوپ میں دامن میرا چادر کی طرح ہے اے میرے حسین میری گود میں آجا آجا میرے بچے میری آغوش میں آجا آجا میرے بچے میری آغوش میں آجا میں ماں ہوں میرا دل نہیں سینے میں سنبھلتا نازک یہ بدن تیرا یہ جلتا ہوا صحرا اور اس پہ ستم یہ ہے کہ تو رہ گیا پیاسا اے میرے حسین میری گود میں آجا آجا میرے بچے میری آجا میرے بچے میری آغوش میں آجا میں گود میں لے لوں تجھے سینے سے لگا لوں سینے پہ سکینہ کی طرح تجھ کو سلا لوں سینے کہ تیرے تیر میں پلکوں سے نکالوں اے میرے حسین میری گود میں آجا آجا میرے بچے میری آغوش میں آجا آجا میرے بچے میری آغوش میں آجا آ کر میرے زانوں پہ سو جاتے تھے جو بیٹا چکی کی مشقت پہ بھی پہلو نہیں بدلا اب کیسے تجھے چھوڑ دوں مقتل میں اکیلا اے میرے حسین میری گود میں آجا آجا میرے بچے میری آغوش میں آجا آجا میرے بچے میری آغوش میں تیری بھی تو اولاد ہے تو بھی تو پدر ہے اولاد کا غم کیا ہے یہ تجھ کو بھی خبر ہے غم بچے کا سہ جائے یہ کس ماں کا جگر ہے اے میرے حسین میری گود میں آجا آجا میرے بچے میری آغوش میں آجا آجا میرے بچے میری آغوش میں آجا جو دل پہ تیرے گزری میں سب دیکھ رہی تھی ہر لاش اٹھانے ہر لاش اٹھانے میں تیرے ساتھ گئی تھی اب بات وہ کہتی ہوں جو بچپن میں کہی تھی اے میرے حسین میری گود میں آ جا میرے بچے میری آغوش میں آ جا میرے بچے آغوش میں آ جا نوحے میں بیاں کیسے کروں سرور و ریحاں پڑھ سکتا نہیں کوئی بھی یہ درد کا قرآن ماں کہتی تھی رہ جائے نہ دل میں میرے ارمان آئے میرے حسین میری گود میں آ جا میرے بچے میری آغوش میں آ جا میرے بچے میری آغوش میں آ جا میرے بچے میری آغوش میں آ جا میں آ جا عباس ہائے عباس ہائے عباس عباس ہائے عباس ہائے عباس آل عمران کہاں اور زندان کہاں لے بہن قید ہوئی تو نہ آیا غازی جب ردا سر سے چھینی میں صدا دیتی رہی تو نہ آیا غازی میں ردا جب ردا سر سے چھینی میں صدا دیتی رہی تو نہ آیا غازی آ گئی شام علم لٹ گئے اہل حرم ریت پر جلتی ہوئی ہو گیا ٹھنڈا علم پرسہ دینے کے لیے مجھ سے ملنے کے لیے آ گئے بابا علی تو نہ آیا غازی جب ردا سر سے چھینی میں صدا دیتی رہی تو نہ آیا غازی جب ردا سر سے چھینی میں صدا دیتی رہی تو نہ آیا غازی دھوپ میں تو تھا شجر تجھ سے آباد تھا گھر ہے برہنہ میرا سر کیا نہیں تجھ کو خبر اے علمدار وفا اس بہن کو باخدا تجھ سے ڈھارس تھی بڑی تو نہ آیا غازی جب ردا سر سے چھینی میں صدا دیتی رہی تو نہ آیا غازی کتنی بے بس تھی بہن اے شہنشاہ وفا نام لے لے کے میرا جب یہ ظالم نے کہا ناز تھا جس پہ تجھے اب بلاؤ نہ اسے اور میں روتی رہی تو نہ آیا غازی جب ردا سر سے چھینی میں صدا دیتی رہی تو نہ آیا غازی تو نہ آیا غازی تو نہ آیا غازی تو نہ آیا غازی جب ردا سر سے چھینی میں صدا دیتی رہی تو نہ آیا غازی Ya Hussain, Ya Hussain, Mawla Haq Imam, Ya Hassan, 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 Ya Hussain, Ya Hussain,
Ya Hussain. The young ones, please. Let the whole world hear my call. For Hussain I'll give my all. Let the whole world hear my call. For Hussain I'll give my all. Let the whole world hear my call. For Hussain I'll give my all. I'm the mother of heroes and giants, from Ali and all for Hussain. I'm the mother of four defiance in the face of those who reign, in the face of those who reign. Let the whole world know my story, from the start until the end. I'm the one who gained the glory, from the Imam my sons defend. My sons on the battlefield will fall. For Hussain I'll give my all. My sons on the battlefield will fall. For Hussain I'll give my all. Let the whole world hear my call. For Hussain I'll give my all. Let the whole world hear my call. For Hussain I'll give my all. Let the whole world hear my call. For Hussain I'll give my all. I'm the mother of four who raised me to a status I'd only dream. In the eyes of Zahra, my lady, I'm the Amir al-Mu'mineen and Amir al-Mu'mineen. Abdullah, Uthman and Jafar fought until they could not stand. Abul Fadl, son of Haydar, gave his eye and his holy hand. Gave his eye and his holy hand. I gave four and I'd give much more. For Hussain I'll give my all. I gave four much more. For Hussain I'll give my all. Let the whole world hear my call. For Hussain I'll give my all. Let the whole world hear my call. For Hussain I'll give my all. Let the whole world hear my call. For Hussain I'll give my all. I'm the mother of the ones killed thirsty by the rivers and on the plains. But the news that surely killed me, what they did to my dear Hussain, what they did to my dear Hussain. I'm the broken mother of the slaughtered, patient after all I've seen. Like Zainab's Fatima's daughter, I'm the Baneen, I'm the Baneen. My tears and pain won't store. For Hussain I'll give my all. My tears and pain won't store. For Hussain I'll give my all. Let the whole world hear my call. For Hussain I'll give my all. Let pain will let the whole world hear my call. Let the whole world hear my call. For Hussain I'll give my all. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
Dear brothers, let's face Qibla so we can recite Ziyarah. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليك يا نبي الله السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا حجة الله السلام عليك يا باعث الهدى السلام عليك يا حبيب الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين وابن سيد الوصيين السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين السلام عليك يا مولاي وعلى أنصارك المستشهدين معك جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء السلام عليك يا معين الضعفاء والفقراء السلام عليك يا مغيث الشيعة والزوار في يوم الجزاء السلام عليك يا أنيس النفوس السلام عليك يا أيها المدفون بأرض توس السلام عليك يا وعلى آبائك السبعة وأبنائك الأربعة ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والزمان الأمان 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 السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن السلام عليك يا قام الكفر والطغيان السلام عليك يا ضعف الظلم والعدوان عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وظهورك السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. دعاء إمام الزمانة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كل وليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقاعدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Dear brothers, please recite Surah Fatiha for Shohadai